everybody. Good to see you again. Hopefully we, sorry again for the technical difficulties we had last week. Hope, looking forward to doing our quarterly Q3 WellCents meeting. Most of you, as always, are joining us from our 401k plans that we manage for your firms and for some of our health insurance group plans as well. I have a new colleague with me today, Mario. I'll let him introduce himself shortly. Stuart has gone on to other things, so Mario is stepping in his place for us to continually make sure we're giving you guys good, unbiased financial planning information and things to think about every quarter. We've had a crazy year. Lots on the docket. We've had the Olympics. We have a presidential election, so all the politics and the stuff is getting thrown back and forth. Just real quick housekeeping for those that are on the call. For those that get employee credits for coming to these things for financial wellness, confident is your employee passphrase to make sure you guys get your credits for that. And with that, again, just for those of you who are joining for the first time, again, I'm Brian. I'm a 20-year board-certified financial planner. I work with a lot of our 401k plans around the country and doing personal planning for individuals. And let Mario introduce, and him and I are going to kind of powwow a little bit and go over some things that we think you could take with you and really help get some valuable information going into the middle end of the third quarter here.
Absolutely. Yeah, you're right, Brian. What a jam-packed year. Could we fit any more events or things into this year for 2024? But yeah, Mario Winnig is here. I'm out of Austin, Texas. This will be my 17th year helping individuals build wealth, families build wealth, manage that wealth. I really see myself as a financial coach. Like Brian, on the screen you see here, I'm also a plan advisor. So I have the privilege of working with businesses locally to me around Texas and to be able to make sure that their retirement plans are top notch. But yeah, that's a little bit about that. But what's been catching your eye this week, Brian? What's top of mind?
Well, certainly I can tell you, you and I were talking about earlier. I assume most people on the call are watching. Olympics is all the craze, right? The U.S. Women's Gymnastics won last night. My wife has made me watch that twice, which was 2 more times than I needed to watch it, which was nice. But I assume you and your family are getting into that with good amounts of your time, right?
Yeah, I have a 12-year-old, so she's probably old enough to now kind of know what Olympics is, or me to explain it to her. And I could think probably the first Olympics that I remember actually watching, having memories, was the '96 Atlanta Games. I think that was when Carrie Strug had the infamous. She had the injury. They didn't need her score to win it, but they didn't know at the time. And I'm waiting for week 2 for track and field and wrestling. Is there any sport in particular that you have to watch?
I love track and field myself. I like the sprinters. I always think it's the weirdest thing ever. These gymnastics to some degree, but certainly the swimmers, they can go and rack up 9, 5, 10 medals, versus another athlete on the basketball team can only get 1. But I like the track and field, the triathlons. I mean, I like watching the swimming, especially the shorter ones, not like the 1600 or something, but like the sprints where they're up and back with different strokes. But it's enjoyable. It's something obviously to keep us all busy, right? I mean, again, I think it's been a nice distraction from the political atmosphere. Oh, yeah. Right, because as we all know, when you're voting for the leader of the free world, if you will, and the power that comes behind that office, it's going to get sporty, right? So I think, was it before? But I know we were supposed to do this last week, but I don't know if Biden pulled out. I think it was Biden pulled out before that, obviously.
Yes.
But now we got a whole other landscape, and obviously the political hate mail is going to go back and forth, and everyone's going to argue about they're right or the other people are right, and that causes a lot of turmoil in the markets. I mean, what are you seeing in the political sphere? I mean, how are your clients kind of? I get the emails all the time, Brian. I'm worried about the political climate because I see it on the news, and what do you tell folks?
That's a great point. So obviously, we have a little bit more what's called emotional resolve when it comes to investing, because we get to see all the analytics over time. We get to really parse it and be kind of agnostic when looking at the data. But a lot of the conversations I've been having when it comes up is just stay the course. History says stay invested. And if they kind of push back on that, I kind of show them some of the data where, typically if it's a D or an R in office, you can still make money. And it's only really the day-to-day players that are moving big sums of money. I think I saw that there was a 2% jump when Biden stepped out of the race in the market and some of the equities, which was kind of interesting. But obviously you and I both know the market doesn't like uncertainty. And there had been a building of uncertainty whether or not he was going to stay in or get out. And so that's interesting. I almost kind of wish that the U.S. political election was a lot shorter, because it just goes on and on and on for months, and up maybe like a year or so with the primaries. And a lot of the European countries just outside the U.S., the election times are just like the runs are a lot shorter. Within 2 or 3 months, it's done. It's like they rip the Band-Aid off. So I almost kind of wish we had that.
I think that would be helpful. For those of you on the call, I think one of the things you want to be very, very careful of, especially those that are joining from our 401k plans, and you're here for some investment, information and things that can really help you. Because ultimately, right, our job is to give you on these podcasts is to give you unbiased advice. We don't have any skin in the game, to really make sure you're taking some good tidbits home with you, and really making sure you're trying to maximize your finances. But for those of you who watch the news, as I call it, right, these are very heavy capitalistic machines that put out the various news cycles. Is to what Mario said, be very careful to make any trades on who you think's going to get in the White House, what do you think might happen with the Senate and the House as far as those seats go. And again, especially when you're talking about the equity in the stock market, tried and true long term, as prices and inflation go up, which we'll talk about more today. You really got to stay. The classic, one of Warren Buffett's classic quotes: "It's not timing of the market; it's time in the market." And in the last 18 months, certainly the year to date as well, the market has done well. I mean, I said the Nasdaq, Nvidia took a big hit yesterday, and a lot of stocks on the Nasdaq, but as of today so far, we're roaring. The S&P's up 15% year to date. We're probably up north of 40% in the last 18 months on the S&P and the Nasdaq. Certainly the big tech stocks are pushing us up. But AI has really been the big thing that's been pushing us. I mean, do you see that continuing, Mario, or what?
Oh, that's a great point. Yeah, the Mag 7, the Magnificent 7, or those companies like Tesla, Nvidia, Meta, Alphabet, Amazon, all those guys, they're really driving the S&P. And obviously, if you take out the Mag 7, the S&P is still doing well, but they're the ones that are pushing it. The growth stocks, which include the tech side. Obviously, there was a little bit of a slide in tech stocks this week, but again, overall year to date, they're still up quite a bit. I mean, one thing I'm seeing with some of my clients, if they come to me, their perspective, that we're onboarding, we're just having a general consult. And if they're not in something like a target date fund that's being rebalanced, but they have individual investments, how did they pick those? How are they managing them? Are they rebalancing? Because even through Q2, growth stocks outperformed value by like some 14%. And you can't let that go unwatched without it kind of skewing the parameters of the weightings of your portfolio. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, money, you always want to follow the money, right? I always tell clients, and certainly in the last year, large cap, big tech stocks and growth stocks have been where the valuations have really gone like through the roof, right? So the novice investor that keeps an eye on that sees that, and where do they put all their money? They put it in the things that have massively increased in value, and sometimes that works, and sometimes it doesn't. Probably more times than not, it doesn't, right? Because if something tends to get overvalued and things get undervalued, then obviously money shift towards those to get a good value for your money. So again, you always, that to Tomorrow's point, this is a good time of the year, especially with the markets going up as the way they have been, is to make sure you're checking your accounts. And I tell this all the time. I travel a good bit around the country to our 401k plans, and we're talking blue collar, white collar. It doesn't matter when I'm in these boardrooms. Like I tell you, I went around to some of our big law firm clients, and you'd think, oh, well, lawyers, they're really on top of this stuff. Doctors, believe it or not, those are kind of two of the professions that don't know any of this stuff, because they're very busy, like all of us are, in their profession. And when I ask in a room full of participants, hey, what's your rate of return been so far this year? And I know the S&P's up 15, no hands go up. People just are not looking at their investments. And that's extremely important, because if you need to get that 9 to 10% long-term return to keep up with inflation, and you don't know what you're getting on your returns, that's a big problem. That you need to make sure that you're checking, not just reviewing your investments and making sure you're in the right places, but are you getting the value and the growth for what you should be getting in your investments? That's extremely important to make sure everyone's keeping an eye on.
Yeah, I love that point you just made there, because sometimes we probably both get the same situation. You get a client or a consult in front of you, and you're talking to the individual, and you look at their portfolio, and you're like, oh, you're under diversified. You don't have any exposure. Like, people often forget, like the S&P only covers about 80% of the U.S. equity cap. where the other 20% comes from like small and mid. And they're like, well, I only like S&P, and that's like the majority of their. Well, what about international exposure? What about maybe possibly some EM, and that can kind of round it out to be able to give you some balanced, efficient growth over time. So those are some of the things I really look for like red flags on a portfolio. You made a great point too that you talk about inflation. I know we still haven't done a rate cut this year. They're maybe projecting maybe 1.25. But yeah, those are kind of the things like people buying homes, people maybe looking to buy a car, high yield savings accounts. Those are some things kind of at play that people are still on people's minds, right?
Yeah, I mean, we've been talking about that for hell. We do these podcasts quarterly, and for the last year and a half of them, we've been pressing on folks on these calls. Check your banks and your cash management accounts. If you've been watching the news, there are lawsuits everywhere. LPL just got dinged for a couple $100 million or something or whatever it was, because a lot of these brokerages have been holding people's cash in cash accounts that were getting 1%, right? When high yield savings and money markets are in the last really year, 2 years have been paying any good ones north of 5%. I mean, so there have been lawsuits everywhere, which is probably good for some of these big firms to be better watch what they're doing with their cash management accounts. But that still continues to be true today. Check your banks, check your high yield savings. If you're not getting 4.5 to 5.5 on the vast majority of your cash savings, FDIC insured, fully liquid, you're still missing the boat. And with inflation, again, the news is continually saying inflation is coming down, but also remember they're going off CPI numbers, which right. bleeds out energy, housing, and food. And I think we all know those are three of the biggies, right? And then you add in things like the value of like sporting events and plane tickets and hotels and car and home insurance has been on the rise consistently with all the natural weather disasters. We need to make sure that your cash is growing value every day and taking advantage of these rates, because as Mario said, they've said they're going to raise rates. They haven't done it. They seem to be pretty, you never know. They seem to be pretty tight that they're going to do it in the next month or two. But if that in fact happens, all of our money markets and our banks are going to start to drop. And then we're going to need to look at other things to keep up with inflation.
Yeah, especially like with real estate. Like I've noticed in here in Northwest Austin where I am, there's been a bit of a softening. There's less people coming to buyers, coming to sellers. If you went 2 years ago, it was like white hot, right? And it still might be hot in certain pockets, coast to coast. But as it trends, it's going to take some time to kind of unwind that this interest rate market that we're in to be able to make money a little bit cheaper for people. I welcome the day because obviously, I want to see people get a home, save for it, get a home, get into the next car. On the wealth management side, especially, you make a great point. I love it that some people often forget that, it might be expensive to buy a home, might be expensive to get a car note, but that high yield savings through like a money market, get while the getting's good. Take advantage of it. When you might not have it in a qualified plan, because a lot of 401ks maybe don't necessarily have like a money market. They might have a fixed or a stable value. But if you have one, take a look at it, see what it's getting for its yield. Remember, it goes on a 7-day yield, so it's kind of fresh, right? That money market yield. And for a lot of my clients who are near retirement, this was several years ago, we made that jump to it. For that capital preservation, that core fixed income, we made a play for that a couple of years ago to take advantage of it. But yeah, I hope. Well, I don't know if we'll ever see 0% interest rate markets again like we did for like that decade, but they'll eventually trend down again.
Yeah, it's funny you bring up the housing. There was a good article. I think it was Yahoo Finance, or I got a million of these things that probably like you that pop up on my phone, and you always read them with a grain of salt. But it basically said about 90% of was it Gen Z, millennials, the younger generations, they have basically given up trying to buy a house. The American dream of buying a house and home ownership. To go buy a house that's 30, 40 years old for $500,000, that's got a lot of, upkeep that's going to require to get a yard versus a brand new, renting facility with a pool and a, movie theater attached to it. And obviously that's where a lot of the developers are putting their dollars in the renting world. That's literally where it's going. And then you hear all the noise of, the Vanguards, the State Streets, the Black Rocks, have they really in fact been buying up all the a lot of the residential real estate since
Yes.
2008. And that, that's a concern. And, continuing to keep the housing prices high because the demand is still there. So buying a house is certainly interesting. I mean, right now, I looked it up this morning, the 30 years still around 7%, the mortgage rate, 15 years, still 6.5%. Historically speaking, that's still really good if you look in the last 30 years. But obviously, humans have short-term memories, and hell, my house is 3%, right? It's hard for people to want to leave their properties at 3%, sub 3% mortgage rates. So the hope is that obviously rates can go down a little bit. I know the presidents that are fighting back and forth for the presidency are talking about trying to provide some type of relief for residential buyers, but that's to be seen, obviously. Yeah,
that's a great point. So it's when I have clients that we're talking about home buying, I say hey, the market's going to look better for interest rates within 1 to 2 years for sure. Like time is on your side. Like going slow is fast when looking to buy a home, when you can have a bigger down payment and maybe you get into a market where money is a little bit cheaper. I also like the point you made that institutional money has come in the last, say, like 5-10 years of buying up residential properties. That also has squeezed people who are looking to be able to buy a home or looking to buy a home. That obviously institutional players have large capital that they're just throwing around and they're just buying homes. They're just money grabs. That's interesting that they're rounding out their balance sheet for different diversifying their income revenue streams, I guess we'll say, as they would probably put it. I remember we were one time we were talking about, like on the budgeting side, I'll say this is that there's a lot of different apps out there, right? That people try to budget. And I always get asked, like, which app do you use? You ever get those questions? Like, what money apps do you use, Brian?
I get that a lot. So again, most on the call may have met with me over the years, or at least some on the call may have met with me over the years. But I do quite a few one-on-ones for our 401k plans, right? So we send out an email and who wants to meet with the CFP to review your account and your financial planning. And the vast majority of the age bracket that sign up for those are usually your 20, 30-year-olds. And that in this day and age, most of them are riddled with student loan debt and credit card debt and various things. And budgeting at that age is paramount. I've heard really good things. Not that I have any skin in the game again, but YNAB, youneedabudget.com. I've heard that's an exceptional one. It's got a lot of functionality. A lot of my clients that use it really rave about it, and they're like, we rave about it, but we still don't even use the full functionality because it's got a lot of things that it can do. But it's good to track everything and where your dollars are going, because ultimately the only way you create wealth is to spend less than you make, and of that amount that you're able to save, we need to make sure we put that in adequate places to grow those dollars. But that's what I hear. I mean, are you hearing anything from other apps or things that people are enjoying?
Sometimes my clients will bring apps, or just people will just bring apps names to me that I've never even heard of. Like I wasn't that in the know on Rocket Mortgage. You see a lot on the commercials. They get a lot of national play. I didn't really pay too much attention to it until I actually had somebody that I knew, and I kind of like, hey, give me your phone. Let me see how that functionality works, right? And there's like a free version, which a lot of these apps have for entry level to get into it, and it can scale from anywhere from like $4 to $12. I think the point that you made, which any of these apps could probably give you, is just know where your money's going. I mean, so often we get so in this mindset, we got to play great offense where we got to make the most money that we can. And I think where you square your income with your financial goals is playing great defense. And that includes budgeting. So you can't, it's like an NBA, in the NBA, like you can't just win on offense alone. You need to have a balanced approach to offense and defense. And the defensive side is probably where people who want to be wealthy or build wealth or be part of the double comma club, like the Millionaire Club or Multimillionaire, that's where there's a gap. And you also said something too that I like, that it's living below your means, and that knowing where your dollars are going helps you to do that. Because if you don't know what your discretionary spending is in a month after you pay your bills, after you feed yourself, how are you planning to? You gotta name those dollars to goals, even if it's fun stuff, right?
Yeah. That's where the corporate engines really make it difficult on humanity, right? A lot of people, let's be honest, a lot of people these days, malls are going under left and right all over the country. A lot of people are shopping on Amazon, right? They're they're going to their local grocery store. I mean, I like for my house, for example, I have probably 5 grocery stores within 5 minutes, right? But we always go to the same one. We're not going from one to the other to say, hey, which one has the lower prices for the good that we're going to. So they make it very hard for us to compare pricing, right? A lot of people just go on Amazon, they search for a product, they see it, and they click on the first one they see. When a lot of people don't even realize you can search for the same product in a lot of different ways on Amazon or other sites and get it for much cheaper. Or maybe you go to a Walmart and get it a lot cheaper.
It's true.
A lot of people just they go by their life so quickly, they don't realize some of the dollars that they're overspending and what they're doing. So it reminds me of I don't know, a lot of people on here, I mean, Saturday Night Live, I try to watch it from time to time, but there's a good spoof where Steve Martin's on there. I think it was like in the last year. I don't know if you ever saw that spoof, but basically it's like a financial planning spoof where they say, they basically, a guy's like a financial planner and he wrote a fake book for the spoof, and it says, don't buy things you can't afford. And Steve Martin's like, well, okay, so if I really want it, I can buy it. And the guy's like, no, you cannot, right? So it's just one of those things where people don't really sit down and kind of drill into their budgeting. And then we get into issues where, so much debt is racked up, and it gets, once you get a lot of debt, especially now, I think credit cards, if you just Google how much credit card debt there is, I think we're at like 1.2 trillion now. Ooh. And, interest rates, so the average credit card interest rate, I think it's like 25-30% right now, which should be illegal in my opinion. The government should be able to cap that. Yes. Hopefully that's something they could look at doing. But once you get in bed with the credit card companies to balances at those interest rates, it gets extremely difficult to build to dig out of them. So you want to have a really good defense, like you mentioned, to hopefully, to try to avoid getting in there. And if you do unfortunately get in there because life happens and you had to pay for some things, or things were more expensive than they needed to be, whether it's the medication you have to take or the things your kids need, we just want to try to get a plan of attack to get out of there as efficiently as we can.
Yeah. One of the things I try to help my clients with from the financial coaching side is try to introduce more friction into their spending habits. So I say, okay, look at your budget and maybe take out 1 or 2 items out of your budget, line items, and then put them in cash. Like, how much food do you need for the month, or you and your family need for the month? And you can throw a total amount for the month. And then maybe if you get paid twice a month, on the first check, you pull out the first half. And on the second check, you pull out the second half. And they're like, you would put cash in an envelope? I'm like, yeah, because here's the thing, like the excesses or the volatility in your spending on, say, groceries, that excesses could go towards other things, fun things, practical things, long-term planning, 529, long-term retirement planning. And it forces you to put friction, not only with the cash because it's tangible, but like, what do I need when I go to the supermarket? When I put the items on the belt, then I have to hand the money over to the cashier attendant there. Just to slow it down, like, because you said we got so quickly used to the fact that Amazon introduces, we got people, there was talk, I still remember the talk of, oh, people won't buy things online. But over time, people became more and more comfortable. And, to your point, Amazon showed everybody that, we can get people very comfortable, get you interested in the product, put it, a review, compare, on their platform. That's what they want you to do. And then put it in your cart and then buy it all in a very short amount of time before we're using all of the capacity of our brain to kind of think through the decision. It's interesting because my wife and I actually were talking about this. Like, when we first got married, we'd have to go into a brick and mortar store and buy something. We wanted a pair of pants or a shirt or whatever. We would go on, try it on. But now people would never buy clothes online, right? Now people buy clothes online. So it's, introducing that friction can be very helpful in someone's life. And actually, previous generations, they were forced to, because money wasn't so easy. You couldn't tap your phone. You couldn't swipe a card. Debit cards didn't exist. Maybe for some families, they didn't have checks. They just worked off cash. And maybe the best deal they got was at the local butcher shop, where they're like, hey, I really like to get an extra pound of meat. Can you float me to the next week where I'll square up with you? Right. So the butcher would write down on a piece of paper, okay, whatever family down the street, they owe me, a pound of meat next week. Right. But it's very interesting. So what else is going on? Let's see here. We talked about apps and elections. One thing also was cryptocurrency. Some of my clients talked about that. Maybe we can pivot to that. Someone sent me an article on BlackRock's Ethereum ETF, and I thought that was interesting. So, obviously Bitcoin has ETF. They got approved for that, but now you're seeing the second largest crypto in Ethereum. The token is Ether. That is the second largest market cap. I mean, we're talking like over almost 600 million account holders. What's your take on that? And when people come to you with questions on maybe speculative investments, what do you tell them, Brian?
Well, yeah, one more just housekeeping item is, make sure everyone that's on the call send in questions, right? We want to make this as interactive as we can. We tried to on the second half of the podcast, so by all means, send in questions, and Mario and I will hit those in order as we continue to talk over some various ideas here. But yeah, crypto. I mean, to year to date, I think I was checking it the other day. Bitcoin's up, 60%. Right.
Wow.
Those Bitcoin ETFs came out, Wall Street, obviously it's Wall Street, right? They want their money. They want their hands in the cookie jar too. And they weren't getting it. So they eventually obviously lobbied to get approval to make, SEC approved ETF products that you can buy to get exposure to Bitcoin. And look, it's just another asset class, right? You got plenty of financial gurus that are publicly against it, right? Like you got the Warren Buffetts of the world who say he would never invest $1 of his own money in it because there's no underlying asset. It doesn't produce anything. The only value of it is hoping that I can sell it to somebody else for more than I paid for it, right? So he's got an argument on that end. And then you have the whole decentralization currency and not going through several intermediaries and its own ledger. So it likely can't be hacked as easily, or so they say, on the other end of the argument. So it's an asset class like anything else. I can tell you I invest in some of the ETFs, but I keep the same diligence and discipline that I tell most of my clients on more. And certainly, I think there's anyone who could argue that Bitcoin's not a speculative asset, meaning it's a very volatile asset. Absolutely. As long as you're going in and you're not doing more than probably 5-10% of your net worth, just knowing that you're going into a speculative asset, I think that's fine. Right. The goal of money and the goal of growing wealth is to put your dollars into things that appreciate over time. Right. So we got real estate in the public markets, private equity markets, and then maybe some other things like paintings and guns and, specialty cars, things like that. But ultimately, crypto has become this other wave of dollars. And you just need to be very careful about how you do it, because there's always, not to tangent too far and go into a long story, I just had two 70-year-old clients last week who were victims of a crypto, what's called a pig butchering scam. They didn't tell me what they were doing. They actually lied to me about what they were doing with some money, and they started asking for big withdrawals. And before I could get it, I told them, I need to know what you're doing. And thankfully, they told me at that point, but they had already lost over $1 million to scammers.
Oh, no.
Their retirement is totally changed now at this juncture. So you got to be very careful of how you invest in these crypto things, because there's a lot of bad actors and scam artists. This is a multi-billion-dollar a year industry where you get a WhatsApp message or a chat, especially for vulnerable seniors, and they fall for it hook, line, and sinker, and they're coached that there's sophistication to it, so to not tell their advisor because they wouldn't understand it. So they're coached to be basically prey for these kind of scams. So crypto has its place. You just want to make sure you do it adequately and you're not doing it in such a way where obviously you're falling victim to any of these scams.
Yeah. I see some questions popping up. I just want to quickly comment on what you were talking about there. If a deal is too good to be true, it's too good to be true, right? There's too many bad actors out there that want your information, want your data, want your money, either through text or by email. Obviously, check URLs. Obviously, at NFP, we have to do videos on compliance and making sure we're up to speed and all the latest nefarious tactics that people are trying to get data and money from businesses and individuals. But check the URL. If you have loved ones that are older, help them with that too. Say obviously like a grandma might get a call that says, or a text that a grandson needs help with money to get out of jail or something like that, or there's some great new investment. So just be very curious, be very credulous when you get those types of incoming fire, and talk to individuals about it too. Talk to your orbit, talk to your family. You want to take one of these questions here?
Yeah.
Ryan?
So just a couple of them off the top. Obviously, just per compliance, we got a couple questions in here, like where could I invest $1,000 for a quick return? What do you think of these stocks? The one thing we can't tell you on here because of fiduciary compliance, obviously, is we can't recommend or give any good or bad insight on certain investments. Minus high level, right? But again, if those of you who have more of those questions, that would be a situation where I would say reach out to us individually afterwards, and we can kind of go deeper on a one-on-one basis, and then possibly get to the stage where we need to put things in place to be able to give you that kind of advice. So that's just one of the things for those that are messaging, hey, what do you think about this stock and that stock? I'd love to be able to say, hey, go buy X amount and you'll be good. But obviously we have to do that in the right chain of command. The budget app I mentioned earlier was YN as in Nancy AB. So you need a budget, YNAB.com. A lot of my clients really enjoy that. I don't think it's expensive. I think they give you a 30 or 60 day free trial so you can see if you like it. And then after that, I think it's like $8 a month or like $100 a year or something like that. It's not anything absorbent. Let me take another one, Mar, and then I'll throw. So I just did a website tour on how to read a statement. Yeah, that would, again, I mentioned that maybe you're saying that from earlier. Again, I just had a good buddy of mine. He's the husband of my wife's girlfriend, one of my wife's good girlfriends. And he's a big investor guy. And he's always talking to me about his 401k and what he's doing. And I asked him what his return was year to date. And he's like, I'm not sure. I'm like, well, how are you investing then if you don't even know what you're getting? And it turns out that he was a little bit under the returns of where he should have been. And we had to make some changes. So looking at your statements and reading them and assessing if you're getting the right value for where you're putting your hard-earned dollars, that's extremely important. So again, reach out to me me or Mario on a personal basis, and we certainly can help walk you through that and make sure you're where you need to be.
Absolutely. I'll jump in. There's someone that said home equity loan advice. One thing I can say on that, a friend of mine actually, they did I'm in the state of Texas. They did a cash out refi, and I haven't completely vetted this, but you have to be very careful because I see a lot of commercials really pushing for those. It might affect your ability to get equity on your second mortgage. Because here in Texas, I think I'll have to vet this in Texas at least. What happened to my friend was they wanted to pull equity out of their home, so they pulled cash out refi, like just how it sounds. But then when they get refinanced into that second mortgage, some states prevent you from taking equity out on that new mortgage. So you're kind of locked in. So be very careful. It's state to state on that. So before you maybe jump into that or a HELOC, really kind of flush it out as far as, okay, where does that put me years out? Maybe I get the money now, but is there any other side of the coin, negative things I need to think about? And then there might be other things too, as far as, if you get your budget down and you start looking at exponentially each month what you can save or something you can cut or subscriptions you're not using, maybe there's the roof fund, or that's the siding fund or the window fund, or redo the bathroom or refresh something or need a new appliance. The days are, I have a 2, a 4, and a 12-year-old. My wife always reminds me that she goes, the days are long, but the weeks are short or something like that. And I always kind of say like, that's kind of how we maybe think about money too, in the sense that a lot can go on in the daily, but on the aggregate with our money, we can tend to win out if we're just pulling out. One more thing I wanted to say too on the speculative thing, just to add to that, one book that really anchored me in my 20s, because I was in my young, unbridled 20s, I was like, oh yeah, speculative investments before I even had any licenses. But in The Millionaire Next Door by Thomas Stanley, that's a book that came out in the 90s. It's a good core financial book for anybody that just wants introduction to how to build wealth, bread and butter. Something like less than 5% of your average Joe and Jane millionaires had speculative investments. So Brian's like spot on. So it's not a big chunk of your portfolio. It's a small, maybe complementary part of your portfolio where you want the widest exposure to your basic, I guess you would say, blocking and tackling of mutual funds. Like your basic growth stock mutual funds, maybe some ETFs that gives you broad market exposure. You don't have to get incredibly fancy to win in the long run. Any other questions that jump out to you there, Brian?
Yeah, well, let's see. There's a couple best places that still offer high yield savings accounts. I mean, there's a million. I mean, I don't say a million, but there's a lot of online banks now that are still giving good rates. I mean, I know I use UFB Direct. I think they're still 5.25. I was trying to look on my phone here for another one that clients of mine use. They're still at like 5.5 right now. Again, these are rates that are probably going to, start coming down here if in the next couple months, especially if the Fed does decide to lower the Fed funds rate there. But again, if you're getting north of 4.5, you're probably pretty good, unless it's a big chunk of money. Maybe say like
Sure.
a $250,000 or something, and you want to go chase another percent. That makes sense. But the best ones I know of are paying about 5.2 to 5.5 still today. Probably not for too much longer. But again, if you're in that 4.5 to 5.5 range, that's where you want to be. I know I've seen a couple questions. I think you wrote it a couple times about Procter Gamble stock and VOO, VTI. Not sure what the ask is. Like, what do I think about them? Again, in this call, it's not like, I call that's more of like a Jim Cramer show, right? You call them and, they've already given you the waivers about, you asking about certain stocks, and, they're not at risk of if they tell you they're good or they're bad. So obviously for purposes of compliance here, we can't really tell you. Obviously VOO and VTI are broad ETF market trackers. So they're going to basically give you the full broad market at a very, very low cost, low exposure. I mean, those are both Vanguard funds. But yeah, feel free, whoever that is, I think we don't see who it is. Feel free to reach out to Mario or myself individually. And then, on a one-on-one basis, we could certainly probably cover it in more detail of what you're specifically asking. That's
great advice. Yeah, that's great suggestions. I'm going to jump in here too. Tips to reduce credit card debt without consolidation, loans, etc. I will say this: when working with people who have several types of debt, and I would say one of the easiest ways to go through that, because you're just slogging through it, right, is the snowball, right, or the where you basically rank all your debts smallest to largest. And you basically focus with intensity on the smallest one while paying minimums on the other. You would think mathematically maybe tackle the one that has the highest interest rate, and that's mathematically correct, but it's not necessarily emotionally correct. And since we're sentient emotional beings, we need to be able to feel momentum, confidence, inertia playing to our favor. And when you're able to knock out a couple of debts, that builds that. And so that's why typically, most often than not, I would say 99% of the time, a debt snowball method tends to work the best because it gives a line of attack, a focus. I've worked with clients that they rank their debts and they slap it on their refrigerator. And then some people get really kind of jazzed up about it. They put like a thermometer around it. So like the thermometer will burst as they pay off the debt or the debts as they go on. And obviously the great thing about it's, we're all trying to sprint on this financial track of life and do well and maybe build generational wealth for not only our family, but for families to come down the line. And if you're trying to sprint on that financial track, but you got debt, it's incredibly hard. So if you need somebody in your corner, reach out to Brian and I. We're happy to kind of walk you through to kind of see what that looks like, that process. I will say this much. When my wife and we got married, we had, about 50, 60 grand in debt, student loans. I had a shoulder operation, so I had some debt there. We bought too much car, and we had that come to, that moment we had to look at each other and be like, okay, we want a house, we want kids, and we want to put more into retirement. And how are we going to tackle this? So that really kind of piqued our interest into resources and books. And I almost kind of wish we had a podcast like this back then, because, this is the early 2000s. I mean, you really have to go to the library or go online at that point. Yeah. It's kind of before the whole podcast craze.
That's how Dave Ramsey's worth $100+ million at this point, right? Is to
one of
the first podcasters and use the Christian world to kind of start where he was, and then he broke out radio shows across the country, and now he's a household name, right? He sells books, and I think he's pseudo retired. He's still doing some podcasts. He always talks about retiring, but yeah, he's one of the big debt snowball guys, and everyone has all the talking heads have their place, right? The Susie Ormans, the Dave Ramsey. Some clients of ours just swear by him. Some are good for a certain kind of individuals, some are good for others, and some are not good for anyone, right? It just depends on depending on your situation and how your psyche and behavioral finance works. It's finding a good advisor for that fit.
And just to jump in there too, like you mentioned a couple of people that are kind of notable in the world of financial, like kind of in our orbit. I like to read everybody. I feel like if I could read everybody, like a client brings a name to me I'd never heard before, whether it's like I don't know, either I want to listen to a podcast or someone's putting a blog that they're really paying attention to. I kind of want to pay attention to what they're putting in their brain, because that kind of gives me a sense of what's trending. Right. And I remember early on in the early 2000s, I read a couple of Susie Orman books too. I think I caught her on TV, like, oh, she sounded like she's credible, all that good stuff. And one line stood out to me. This is before I ever bought a home. She made a comment that in over 3 decades plus, the number of people living in a home went down by more than a third, but the size of the home went up by a third.
Yep.
And she raised the question like, okay, how much home do you need? Right. And I never thought about that before. I even thought about maybe saving up for home. Like, okay, I was like, how much home do we need? I never. So
it's funny. I'm not the tangent because I want to get some more of these questions that people are asking, but my wife and I fight over that all the time. We have an 18-month-old with another one on the way and a 4-level, 3-bedroom house. And she's like, we need more house. I'm like, I have a friend of mine who's got 2 kids that lives in he's a doctor, a client of mine, friend of mine, and they live in an apartment. They live in an apartment, 2-bedroom with 2 kids. It's like, so there's, it's not always exactly what you need. It's really what you're comfortable with as a person.
Yeah.
But again, those are some of the life tussles that we all kind of mention with. Or we all fight with.
You make a good point there, Brian, because sometimes my wife will, it just happens to be, she's always said similar comments after the 3rd child. And I'd be like, it gets to a point where like, do we want just space away from each other? Is that what it has come to?
Or space for the sake of space.
Yeah. Even where I am now, you can't see it because we have our back screen on. I'm in my office now, but it'll eventually become probably one of my younger kids' room. And so I've talked to my wife, like maybe the plan down the road is to put like a small tiny home in our backyard that'll become, my little office. Yeah. Maybe put like a half bath there. And I'm kind of dreaming about that someday because obviously
a little man cave. You got your office, a little pool table, a little mini bar. I mean, those are I don't see those online. Those are great ideas.
They're small now, my kids, but they're just growing by the day. So that's my other incentive to help people out and to build out anything that we're missing here in the.
Let me get some. So there's a couple good questions. Let me start. Sorry, we got in a little tangent there, guys. So the answer. So for clients 5-7 years away from retirement, how would you suggest about the bucket approach strategy? Would bonds be best in a brokerage account or 401k? So this is kind of really up my alley. I hold a slew of different retirement credentials. My specialty is dealing with retirees, but I'm a retirement income certified professional. So there's bucket approach strategies. There's systematic withdrawal strategies. There's flooring approach strategies. There's combinations of the 3. There's various ways to do it. But one of the things that hurts people very efficiently when they get to the withdrawal phase of retirement, they're starting to pull out of their retirement accounts, is they just keep all their account in one fund and like a target date 2025 or something, and they're going to pull pro rata. So if you have a year like last year or 2 years ago where bonds and stocks were down at the same time, you're going to really hurt yourself as far as how long your money lasts. So the idea beyond a bucket strategy is put an account number over here with your fixed money, an account here with your bond ladders, an account here with your stocks, and maybe just growth stocks, account here with your dividend stocks, and you have it all spread out. So if let's say the market's up this year, but bonds are getting killed, maybe I'll just take the interest off the bonds and I sell some of my stocks. So by being efficient on what I'm selling to make dollars available to go to my bank, that's a much more efficient way to get long-term wealth out of the withdrawal phase. So, again, we're very, very efficient at that. So reach out to me on that. I mean, bonds, it depends on the kind of bonds. There's international bonds. There's government bonds. There's corporate bonds. There's short, long-term bonds. There's all kinds of bonds. Typically, they're income-producing assets, right? So normally you don't typically want them in a brokerage account. There's some cases that you do. But again, those are the kind of things that you look at when you put together a retirement income plan, either on your own or working with a personal planner. Mario, you want to take another one of these?
Yeah, I was looking at here. So the book that someone asked about, the book that I'd mentioned, that the author is Thomas Stanley, and that is The Millionaire Next Door. That it came out in the mid-90s. I think I probably was in junior high or maybe just because I was a freshman in high school. So I didn't know about the book then. I was not thinking about building wealth as a 14, 15-year-old. They actually refreshed the data set. They came out with the book, him and his daughter. I forget her name, but they refreshed the data set to see if it had moved in the 2+ decades since that mid-90s book. So that I think it's called The Next Millionaire Next Door. I think her name's Farrah Stanley. Tragically, Thomas Stanley passed away, but anything by him is great. It's a good, I will say this much. When reading The Millionaire Next Door, I came in with 2 things. One, it shined a light on where I was good with money. And then it also shined a light on where I needed growth with money. And that was good. I wish I read it as in my mid-20s, but I should have read it probably my senior year in high school. It probably should be part of probably you and I probably didn't get K through 12 micro financial plan education like a lot of people don't get, right? Even how to write a checkbook out. But that's one. Somebody was asking too, maybe more like an investment general question here. I see as interest rates drop, where would you move high yield money to if the rates drop considerably? Other ways to. I'll start it off. I know Brian, you probably have something to jump in on that too. Getting 5%, getting 4%, getting 3%, even getting 2% are great. If it starts dipping below 3, maybe start looking short-term medium bonds. Brian makes a great point. There's all different types of bonds. You can ladder bonds, especially you got to be mindful at that beyond the accumulation phase. Like if you're on this podcast right now, you're listening to us and watching us, you're probably still putting money in. So we're all in the accumulation phase. But once you start really eyeing that deaccumulation phase, how am I going to take this money out? You've got to be really mindful, like Brian says, the different buckets and strategies you pull it out, because we're all at that point going to try to stretch the nest egg as long as possible, the drag on it. And, Brian, we have like software that we use, and we're looking at analytically to be able to, as we start to draw this down, what's the most prudent and responsible way to do that? Any other thoughts on that too?
Yeah, I would say, again, none of us know where interest rates are going. I mean, you could even make an argument that they should be going back up, right? There's arguments on all sides of the table. But let's say that the things do hold from what we're seeing, and we're seeing on the news that rates are going to drop once or twice before the end of the year. Yes, high yield savings are going to correspondingly come down. So if you're especially, nearing or entering retirement, a lot of clients of ours have been locking in long-term products while the rates are high. Right. So I just had a client who had a 3% fixed account in their 401k. We rolled them out. They live in Alabama, and we bought them a 5.6% 6-year fixed annuity. Oh. Right. So that they're getting 5.6%. They can take 10% out of it a year with no kind of annuity surrender charge or anything, which is plenty more than they need out of that asset. So more and more clients, before they see these rate drops, they're locking into some of the long-term CDs, long-term annuity products, and getting a portion of their money, not all of it, right, but a portion of their money. Because, again, let's say, heaven forbid, you think they're going to go down, but they go up later. Once you've locked that money into like a long-term CD or fixed annuity, it's kind of there, right? And you're getting that 5.5 percent or something. So you're seeing a lot of clients do that to try to lock in stuff long-term. But, yes, if they get low and low and low, T-bills will come down, CDs will come down, fixed annuities will come down. And there is no really other safe thing to go get 5-6% again. You'd probably have to look towards taking some risk in other areas to try to achieve those returns.
That's a great point. Yeah.
Sorry, go ahead, Maury. Go ahead.
No. I would just make sure we cover as many questions as possible. I think someone was asking about private mortgage insurance.
Yep. I was about to that. Yep.
Yeah. I would just and then I'll take first stab at it. There are good calculators to see, even maybe through your own existing lender, where obviously we want to eliminate PMI as quickly as possible, even if you have a great interest rate, because the interest is not helping you, it's helping the lender, right? Just in case you're not able to pay the note month to month. So take a look at it and see what the current schedule is before you lift PMI, but also if you were to accelerate it by paying extra or paying down on it. So if there's bonuses, or if you're in sales, you have a variable income, or there's a part-time job, try to throw extra money at that. Obviously, that's very general, 30,000 feet above the ground. There might be more pressing things with discretionary money, like possibly like a higher interest rate on a credit card, or some other types of debt. But that might be that's my aerial answer, I guess we'll say it. To get granular, reach out to us. We can help you get to that detailed level to see, okay, hey, maybe there's something that's more priority beyond the PMI. Any thoughts on that, or a question that jumps out at you?
Ryan? Yeah, well, so normally PMI falls off. Normally interest, mortgage interest protection PMI. Normally that falls off when you get about 80% loan to value. So you'd want to really dig in to see where you are as far as how close you are to getting that off. Because also remember, mortgage insurance is not tax deductible. The interest is, but the premium you pay for the mortgage protection is not. So you could obviously pay it off faster to get to that 80% loan to value. Or another strategy some clients use, especially a lot of my real estate folks, is they'll buy a house with the mortgage insurance, and then they'll renovate it, have it reappraised, and then they have then their loan to value is over 80%, and it falls off. So that's kind of an outside thing. If you need to do or you're planning to do a renovation on your home to make it worth more, that's another way people get around that. A lot of my realtor people in the real estate business, that's what they do. They buy homes and then they have the mortgage insurance while they're renovating them, and then they sell it or they keep it and rent it out, and all that stuff falls off.
Interesting. Yeah, it's a good strategy. I can see that playing out.
Let's see what else we got. I was buying a condo that I can just afford, a better investment than just renting for cheaper and keeping that large down payment in the market for years, decades. Darned if you do, darned if you don't, right? It's kind of, that's kind of one of those questions. Again, I just had a good buddy / client of mine, married, 2 kids. They have their forever home, and he just went and bought a boat. Right, they live on the water. I'm in the Maryland area. We got a lot of nice rivers and stuff on the inlet. It's a nice life in the boating life in the state. And certainly buying a boat or a car that you're using is not a good investment. But again, there's other value to buying a condo, right? That you own, right? You can host your parties. No one can raise rent on you. You have a place to hang your hat, to call your home that you own, right. Or even if you still have a mortgage, you're technically still an owner on it with the bank. So there's other value to it, right? So it really, again, I would reach out to me individually, but it really depends more so about what's going to make you happier. Is renting a little bit better and nicer, or is the condo long term financially? We just don't know, right? Depends how the condo appreciates. Depend what happens with the rental community that you may be renting in. So long term, what's going to give you more wealth? There's no way to totally know. So again, we'd want to dig into the particulars, but we'd also want to look at that superlative aspect of what's going to be, where are you going to be happier with how your family situation is.
Absolutely. With my clients, I try to kind of probe them and flesh it out how much home fever they have, in buying a home. Because once somebody gets home fever, it's really hard to kind of like cool them down, because it's kind of like, buying a car, like again, kind of adding friction in where I was going to say something you were kind of sparked a moment that mortgage lenders typically, like on a 30-year, what is like the first 10 years is all interest, is about right. So how often do people really spend in their homes? It's about 7 years. Mm-hmm. So really that's where banks and credit unions make a lot of their money, right? Yep. Because they know people don't stay in their homes very long. So one thing I would add into the conversation with clients or this particular individual, do you really see yourself staying there for 7-10 years plus? Is this your forever home? Is this a bridge to a larger home later on? Be very wary of that, because again, at the end of the day, we're trying to make you happy, but we're also trying to help you build wealth. And to thread that needle can be a little bit difficult. And sometimes it just might mean patience.
Yeah, I always talk about it. Remember, guys, to Mario's point, a house is really an enjoyable liability. By the math, unless you keep that, I know you mentioned about 10 years, I would argue, again, in the last 3 years, homes have gone up crazy, like 15% year over year in a lot of places in this country. So that's kind of an anomaly. But normally, historically speaking, home values go up around 5% a year. Between your interest, HOA, upkeep, lawn care, calling the plumbers, updating HVAC, updating the water heater, redoing new appliances. You take all this stuff into account, you really don't break even until about 30 years by the math in most places. I've done the math several times. A home is an enjoyable liability unless you either have a renter in it who's paying you money,
sure.
or like a pool house of renters that's paying you money and driving income, or you eventually are going to keep that house in the family either 25, 30 plus years. And at that point, you either keep it in the family or you rent it out and you buy a new place. But there's no wealth to be really created unless you're buying a house and really renovating it. And you're really good at that, right? Where you buy a $250,000 house, throw $50,000 into it, and somehow are able to sell it for $5,000. That would be that's legitimate, right? If you're able to have those details. But a lot of people think if I'm renting, I'm pissing away money versus an overall long-term wealth. It really isn't the case, depending on what you're paying for rent, obviously. But just keep those things in mind as well. Good delta for tax-free investments versus high-yield taxable accounts, right? I mean, you go buy municipal bonds, for example, right? You can buy the good corporate, triple B or higher investment grade bonds right now are probably still yielding 5 to 5.5%. Your municipal bonds, which are triple tax-free if you buy them in the state you live in, they're probably paying, good quality ones are probably paying 3%. So it depends on your tax bracket, right? It's all about the math of what's giving you a better after-tax yield. So reach out to us individually. But things like municipal bonds, sometimes I see clients buying those in IRAs, which is nonsensical, right? Like someone asked earlier, do I want to buy bonds in a brokerage account? Well, municipal bonds, certainly, right? You wouldn't want to buy those in a tax deferred account because that defeats the purpose.
Absolutely.
So things like that you want to keep an eye out for.
Well, I'm really excited about the participation. We had a lot of questions today. So appreciate all the participation on the people listening and checking in, whether they're just kind of driving or they're in their office or maybe hitting dishes. I tend to watch or listen to some of these podcasts when I'm doing housework at night, trying to keep the house from falling in disarray with my 3 little munchkins. But did we get all the questions, Brian?
Yeah, there's one more. I think. Let's see. I do not have a mortgage. But I do need to get a roof replaced. Would it be good using a loan for that or other renovations, or would that be a good idea? Again, not my cliche answer is it depends. I have a good client of mine in Alabama who's basically They live that kind of down on the bayou down there, and they're redoing a lot of stuff. They're going to retire and probably move away from there in 5 years.
Sure.
But it's just providing a lot of extra value for the home, right? New siding, all these various things that they're doing. So obviously, should you get a loan for it? Well, if you can fund it through other means without a loan, that's your best case scenario. I assume you're saying that because the other means aren't there right now. But it depends on the financing terms of the loan that you could get, right? And then the value that you're going to get by doing those renovations. Certainly a new home is going to put additional value on the home. If you're looking to sell the home in a year, and you think by spending $10,000 on a new roof, you could sell it for an extra 25, that would be valuable, right? Like you'd want it. So again, reach out to us for more particulars. A lot of these questions you guys have you're asking here are phenomenal, but the further details really matter. But yeah, feel free. I know our team on the back end is popping up our QR codes.
Thank you, Kelly. Yeah.
It's always a pleasure to have these meetings with you guys and take some time out of our valuable time, as well as you're doing the same on yours, to get some good information and ask some great questions. And that's what we're here for, to continually do these quarterly. We'd love to get your feedback on things that you like us to continually talk about, so we can put them in our agendas. We'd love the interaction for the more questions we get, the better, so we can really target what we're talking about to give you value. But with it, I just want to say thank you for your time as always, and wish you guys a great week, and enjoy the Olympics. And I'll turn it over to Mario if he has anything as well.
Yeah, absolutely. I love the participation. I love all the questions, the diversity in the questions too. It's anything. It's like something like 1 in 2 people have never spoken to a financial professional, and so to give people an outlet and a resource where they can listen in on something that's a topic that's meaningful for them, that's impactful for them, or they have an outlet to be able to reach out to one of us. I love it. I'm happy to be part of the team. And so we just want to help as many people as possible and give them, really prudent, responsible, advice that we can. I mean, Brian and I, we don't take this lighthearted. We live in this soup all the day, every day rather. We just want to help people.
Yep.
And if anything, we're kind of like your coaches in your corner.
Yep.
I think just like that. So
this is our passion. And again, sorry for any of the questions we did miss, because there's just only so much time, obviously, as we come up here on 1 o'clock Eastern. But again, feel free to, if we didn't get to your question, please, by all means, reach out to us. If you didn't get a chance to ask the question, reach out to us. But we are here as a resource for you, versus going elsewhere and never knowing if you're getting, people telling you things for some other particular rhyme or reason or plan of attack that they may have. So, thank you again for your time. And, we look forward to hearing from you, and we'll see you again in the fourth quarter.
Take care, everybody.
Thanks, guys. Have a great week.